In the name of God, holy and undivided Trinity. Amen. Susan was teasing me, as is her wont, when I was getting dressed in the sacristy, and she was saying, "Oh, these clothes you put on, and this." And I said, "Oh, I have a set at home." And I parade around in it. I just love these clothes. I love putting these things on. And it can be a little bit confusing to be wearing things like this because, it's not clearly evident why we wear things like this. We can talk about where they come from, what era people dressed like this and why it's sort of been retained as something that the church wears, and it becomes then sort of slippery stuff to handle because it sort of sets me apart in a certain way, and it makes it look like something is invested here that is to be looked upon as a distinct sort of role, activity. Yes, of course, all of that's true in a certain way, but in another way, there's nothing magical, if you will, about being a priest, as far as I know. It is something, though, that happens because the community needs to find a way to express itself in a particular way. Because, as the writer of the Hebrews has said so beautifully, Jesus did it once for all. There is no longer a priest who stands making intercession for the people. That used to be, before Jesus. There was a temple, and there was a priest who offered sacrifices so the people could be cleansed from their sins. And this had to be done again and again and again because people kept on sinning. Yeah, we do. But finally, Jesus came to be the one who would, by his own death, take on the sins of the whole world and obliterate them, deal with them, end it all. And so the temple's sort of veil was rent, was torn. The holiest of holies was made wide open. And that's wide open to all of us. And Jesus, in leaving us a memorial of his life and death in the communion supper, it really is only because we all do it together that we can have the memorial and the presence of Jesus at this table. So what the church asks particular people to do, and I guess I'm one of those, is to stand and say for all of us those words. To set apart the bread and the wine so that they can be for all of us the real presence of Jesus. Only made possible because all of us bring his presence into the midst. That's why the portion that we heard from Hebrews says, it's really important that you gather together. Not as the habit of some is to say, oh, well, I can be spiritual by myself. Because Jesus does become most fully present when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name. And we, gathering together, breaking bread and sharing a cup, we know his presence among us and within us. And it's like the holiest of holies is alive and well in your heart and in mine. But it becomes the slippery thing is it sometimes seems like, oh, I've got to get Dave to do this or a priest to do this, rather than really knowing it's only possible for any priest to be a priest. It isn't for me to be parading around at home in these robes, you see. It's because we're together. And you've asked me to speak on our behalf. And indeed, the church trained me to do that, and hopes that I'll do it with a modicum of integrity. But it's to say that I do this with all of us. It's life generative, because Jesus is in our midst. You sit and say. So there's such a privilege in being in our midst, your midst, as your priest. It's been such a beautiful experience, and continues to be. But the sense that when we break bread and share a cup together, it is indeed that you participate from the heart, and you invite me to do so as well. That's something that predates my arrival here. You have known yourselves to be, from the heart, the community that God has called together. And it's so beautiful to step into this space with you. The readings today are rather dire when it comes to end times, or so it seems at first. All the horrors that Daniel foresaw, and that Jesus was speaking to his disciples about in terms of what will happen in the world. And we know that. We know that in the present time. But interesting, as Jesus speaks with 4 of his disciples about the end time, he says, this is but the birth pangs. Did you catch that? That sort of turns it right around. As awful as it is, or as awful as it can be, as the world sort of does what it does, they're but birth pangs from a certain perspective. It happens so that something can be born. Wow. And the way in which we sort of ride that, or find our way through all of that, is continuing to gather together and be present as the body of Christ, for one another, with one another, celebrating the Eucharist in the midst of whatever is going on in the circumstances of our lives individually, or in the lives of our communities, or whatever is happening nationally or internationally. We continue to break bread and share wine, blessing it through the presence of Jesus, blessing it to be the presence of Jesus. And then we've made the way for grace to appear. We've done what we can so that our lives can be graced in the midst of things that we do not understand. And then perhaps we can really feel and know all that we are experiencing as a birth pang. It's so something new and fresh can be born. That is one of the gifts that the church brings to all of us. It's something more than hope. It's some awareness and realization that God is working even through things that most distress us, through circumstances that most bewilder us, that God is working through it all to bring something new into the world, even when we can't logically believe it. And that changes how we are with one another, how we are with our neighbors, how we are in the world. Because we carry a living hope. My wife, Janie, cooks with many recipes available to her, and then again, nothing can be repeated because she never follows a recipe. And I think that's something about how I preach, and yet her food always comes out tasting really good, and I'm never sure about my preaching, but I pull from many things all at once. And one of the things that I brought today, and I think it's because I needed it, or at least I needed to ponder it. Do you remember Dr. Seuss? Mm-hmm. Well, of course you do. I mean, The Grinch Stole Christmas. I mean, that's Dr. Seuss, right? And we're reminded of him again and again. Well, Janie in the kitchen, where she creates, has this little tile sitting above the sink. And it says, "Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened." I needed to bring this today. And this whole current of how God continues to reveal the new and the fresh through endings and through circumstances that are difficult to negotiate, and losses, goodbyes. You know, of course you cry, saying it's over. And it's not yet over. I'm here next week. But there's also the smiling that it happened. The joy of having come into your midst, into the midst of this space, is such a gift. It's been, there's no recipe. It's just what came together. And it's beautiful. So, I do cry that it's coming to an end, but I'm also smiling that it happened. So this Jewish Dr. Seuss was a source of much wisdom, and he touched my heart today. Amen.
Amen.